With the latest edition of Codex Space Marines, we were officially given 4 successor chapters of the Salamanders. I've already tackled 2 of those 4, the Dragon Spears and the Covenant of Fire, and I'm back once again to show you how to convert a 3rd. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this video, I'll be showing you how to convert members of the Dark Krakens. So this chapter was highly requested, and a few of you suggested I use Gravis armor here, so I did exactly that. However, as I wanted miniatures which had regular hands and not giant power fists, I opted to use the Eradicators. At the time of making this video, the Heavy Intercessors had not been yet released, which could have been used instead. Additionally, the multi-part Eradicators weren't available either, so I had to use one of the easy build models found in the Indomitus set. I started by first removing all the components required to build one of the Eradicators, with the exception of the head, before cleaning up the mold lines and contact points. With the components removed from the sprue, I then wanted to remove the push-fit rods. I find this unnecessary if you're planning to use glue anyway, and they would have just gotten in the way of building the conversion. I started by clipping away the 2 halves of the rod from the back, before clipping away the long rod from inside of the torso. With the rods removed, I could begin assembling both the legs and the torso together, which left me with the basis for this Gravis armoured Dark Kraken. The Dark Krakens have 2 key aspects that I wanted to depict with this first customization. First of all, they all hail from an oceanic world, and secondly, they are hunters, both of which can be depicted by their weapon of choice. However, before I could attach this new weapon, I needed to free up the hands from the melter rifle. I began by using my knife to cut away just below the top of the hand, which releases the left fist. Then I did the same to the right hand, cutting both above and in front of the fingers. With both of these cuts, I tried to maintain as much of the hands as possible without damaging them. With both hands free, I could trim and clean them up, as well as removing the small protruding section of the handle from the top of the left fist. My plan with this model wasn't to have him holding the weapon with both hands. Instead, I wanted to have the Dark Kraken holding the weapon at ease. If I were to have attached the forearm as it currently stood, the arm would have been posed across the chest. So to adjust, I needed to trim away the small section of forearm that wasn't covered with the additional armor plate. I cut and trimmed away at the forearm until I had a flat surface and a wider angle at the elbow. In addition to this, I also needed to flatten out the elbow joint to allow the forearm to be glued into place. Once I was happy with the positioning, I could glue the forearm into place, which left me with an arm that was pointing slightly downwards. With the right arm prepped and in place, I could attach the Harpoon Launcher, which was taken from the House Orlok kit. As I've already mentioned, I wanted something that was both nautical and that would reflect the hunter aspect of the chapter, and a harpoon seemed to cover both nicely. However, in order to attach this human-sized weapon to this Gravis armoured Space Marine, I needed to make a few adjustments. The first involved clipping away the small protruding disc from the harpoon's reel. I used my clippers for this before trimming back this area. I made a few comparisons back to the Marine as I did so I could see exactly where I needed to make these cuts. Once I was happy that the fist was able to fit, I could glue the Harpoon Launcher into place. The resultant tip of the harpoon did sit a little lower than the feet of the Space Marine, but this didn't matter too much, as I would mount the model slightly higher on his base. With the right arm completed, I could start work on the left. I had already prepped the fist, so this could be glued straight to the arm as it was intended. However, as there was no longer a melter rifle to hold, the position of this arm needed to be adjusted too. I began by first of all clipping away and trimming flat the rod that was protruding from the torso. As the arm would be hanging down at the Marine's side, the armpit needed to be slightly lifted to allow the arm to fit, but by doing this I wouldn't have as much of a flat surface to glue the arm to, so I needed to create a pin. This is kind of a staple technique of my videos by now, but pinning involves drilling 2 1mm holes, one into both the torso and one into the shoulder using a pin vise. Then I take some 1mm thick steel wire and superglue this into one of the holes, the arm in this case. I trim the wire so that only a few millimeters in length are left protruding using my clippers before gluing this into the other hole. By doing this, I was able to create some kind of bridge between the arm and the torso, which allowed me to lift the arm out a little. However, this left me with a bit of a gap, and so it needed to be filled in. So I reached for my ever useful perfect plastic putty, squeezed out a little bit and prodded it into the gap beneath the shoulder before smoothing it out. This is perfect for little gap filling jobs like this because it's easy to use and it dries fast. But even if you aren't as skilled at sculpting, it doesn't matter because the joint is quite hidden and so won't be visible once painted. With the gap filled, the arms were completed. The problem with moving the weapon away from the chest was that we were left with an unsightly hole in the chest of the model. But this just gave me the perfect opportunity to really build up that glory hunting aspect of the Dark Krakens. So in case you haven't already guessed it, here it comes. Dead animal bits. Yes, the ever useful kitbashing trope of slapping bits of dead animal to your miniatures and calling it a stylistic choice saves our proverbial bacon once again. This time around, I sourced these parts from a range of different kits to represent the myriad of beasts that the Dark Krakens may fight. The first was a cape from the Black Ark Corsairs kit. I've used these a number of times in the past and they are great for lizard skins. To use them, however, I needed to first use my saw to cut out a slimmer, more manageable piece. The plastic of the cape is quite thick in places, so a saw is generally preferable. Once I'd removed a smaller section, I began to trim and file a piece into a thin piece of skin that could be placed over the hole in the Space Marine's chest. However, the piece didn't quite conform to the roundness of the chest armor, so I need to very carefully bend it so that it would better fit into place. Once the piece had a slight curve, I could glue it into place onto the chest so that it covered that hole. Continuing with the trophies, I wanted to create something that loosely resembled the lower jaw of a shark or similar sea predator. To do this, I grabbed an orc jaw from the ever-trusty Citadel skull set. Using my knife, I sliced it in half between the two front teeth, and then cleaned up the cut, rounding out the bone slightly before gluing this around the gorget. The jaws fitted nicely into place with a little adjustment needed to create a fairly close approximation to a shark jaw. The next trophy to add was one of the shoulder pad adornments from the Auroch Brutes kit. As these are intended to be glued onto the rounded shoulder armor of the Brutes, I found that attaching these to the Space Marine was incredibly easy. No trimming or adjusting was required, I simply glued it into place. To finish off the trophies and the dead animal bits, I grabbed some Tyrannid carapace armor, specifically those found in the Genestealer kit. I chopped them in half and cleaned up the cut with my knife. These were then glued to the underside of the left shoulder pad to create the appearance of it being used as additional armor. The final nautical flair to add to this model came in the form of a folded net taken from one of the Idoneth Deepkin sets. Much like the Harpoon, this works great for referencing the Dark Kraken's oceanic origins as well as their big game hunting aspects. This was simply added to the belt with no extra modification. The only thing left to do next was to choose a head. I kept it simple here and just chose to use a normal intercessor head. I thought that the exposed head would contrast nicely against the bulky armor, and with that, the conversion was completed. All that's left to do was to paint and base, which left me with this. And here we have the finished Dark Kraken. I painted him in the standard colour scheme of the chapter, black armour with purple arms and shoulder pads. I also chose to paint the carapace pieces in red to add a little contrast against the darker colour, but also as a little nod to the shared name with High Fleet Kraken. You will also notice that I gave this particular marine a fair complexion. This was partly to stand out against the black armour, but also to reference their nocturnal homeworld. Additionally, as it's unlikely that this particular marine would have travelled to Nocturne, his gene defect wouldn't have been triggered. So, that concludes this third Salamander Successor conversion with only the Black Vipers left to tackle. As with the previous two conversions, tackling a chapter that not only has a name, one image and a small paragraph of background meant that I had a lot more freedom. I could build my own interpretation of the chapter without the worry of getting their lore wrong or missing out something important. I plan on tackling the final Salamander Successor, the Black Vipers, in the coming weeks, so if you enjoyed this guide, then subscribe so you don't miss out on that video. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, then check out my previous Successor conversions too. If you would like to help me out, then you can check out my Buy Me a Coffee page if you want to support me as a one-off, or Patreon if you would like some ongoing membership, and you can find a link to both of those in the description below. And so until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.